Narration script, the 30-second hook. Narration, Jing HIODSNDNP, Kuchtin, NH, NMDN Vow SSGLPP. On a bitterly cold day in Manhattan, January 7th, 1904, the fate of the richest immigrant in America was decided by a fragile human heart. His wife, Louise Boldt, was gone. Within hours, a devastating two-word order tore T through the New York system and traveled north to the Thousand Islands, where 300 men were building an unparalleled monument to Lover Castle. The message was final: stop all construction, instant. Lee, a multi-million-dollar dream froze in time, abandoned forever. The question remains, why would a man who had everything choose to leave his greatest creation unfinished? Simply because the only person who mattered was gone. We stand here, not at a beginning, but at the terrible, final climax. On that cold day in Manhattan, January 7th, 1904, the world stopped. For George Boldt, he was a man who had engineered perfection, who had meticulously planned every detail of the world's most famous hotel. Yet, in that quiet room, he faced the one logistical failure he could not solve: the frailty of the human heart. His wife, Louise, died at the age of 42, quietly surrendering after months of illness. We, the observers of history, often assume that supreme wealth, power, and success can build an impenetrable fortress against sorrow. But on that day, George Boldt, the man who commanded vast fortunes and legions of staff, was stripped down to nothing but a grieving husband before the finality of death. Every crown is useless, every empire crumbles into insignificance. His immediate reaction was not one of management or efficiency, but of absolute, heartbroken devotion. Within hours, the simple, devastating two-word command was wired hundreds of miles north, slicing through the winter landscape to the Thousand Islands. The message: stop all sea construction. Imagine the scene at Hart Island. This was a place pulsing with life and promise. 300 men were laboring over towers of pink grey granite, shaping arches and halls for a 6-story, 120-room private palace. It was a chaotic, hopeful symphony of chisels, saws, and scaffolding, the beautiful roar of creation. Then, the foreman read the short telegram. The sound vanished. D. The chisels stopped mid-swing. Painters gently set down their brushes. Carpenters left their saws resting on the horses. The collective noise of a monumental construction project, costing millions and end by years of relentless effort, simply ceased. In a quiet, reverent line, the workers abandoned the island. This wasn't a strike. It was an act of profound respect for agree. If they all understood, the castle, designed to be the ultimate Valentine's gift, a tangible, stone and steel promise of eternal love, was instantly transformed into an agonized memorial. The unfinished building remained, standing there like a heart that had been abruptly silenced. George Boldt never reversed the order. He never set foot on the island again. His refusal to finish was not a practical decision. It was a testament. To finish the castle without Louise would have been a practical lie, a betrayal of the very purpose for which it was conceived. He chose to leave it as an honest expression of his interrupted life. The half-finished palace, frozen forever in that moment of early 1904, forces us to ask the most fundamental question: what kind of love, what kind of life, what kind of ambition could result in such a dramatic, absolute surrender? To understand the crushing weight of that silence, we must now rewind. We must start where George Boldt started, alone in the crowded, unforgiving kitchens of New York City. To truly comprehend the scale of the sacrifice George Boldt made in 1904, we must understand the impossible distance he had already traveled. Rewind t. 1864, a boy, just 13, stepped onto the chaotic New York docks from Prussia. His name was George Carl Boldt. He possessed nothing but the clothes on his back, a native tongue no one understood, and a searing ambition burning beneath his fear. Imagine the solitude, the scent of brine and oil, the deafening crush of a city that didn't care. He found the lowest station available, a busboy in a dockside hotel. His world was the basement, damp, dimly lit, smelling perpetually of grease and sour dishwater. He cleared the tables of others, scrubbed pots until the skin on his hands cracked, and slept in a closet-sized room. His existence was defined by anonymity and relentless physical labor. His only company the silent hope of a better tomorrow. But George was not merely a servant. He was an acute observer. As he moved through the dining rooms, invisible to the wealthy patrons, he was collecting data. He realized that a hotel's true value wasn't the marble or the height of the ceiling, it was the human connection. He learned what most people miss. If a guest feels important, truly cared for, and seen, they come back. This empathy, born directly from his own experience of being unseen, became the singular, powerful philosophy that would later define modern American hospitality. Driven by this insight, he moved up, but the work remained hard. A brief, unsuccessful venture in Texas left him poorer but wiser. Back in New York, he kept learning, searching for the right door. That door opened in 1876 in Philadelphia. George secured a managerial position at the exclusive Philadelphia Club. Here, he honed his mastery of the quiet rules of elite service: anticipate every need, maintain absolute discretion, and let elegance speak softly. It was within those hallowed walls that he met Louise Augusta Carr, the club steward's daughter. Louise had an inherent, almost instinctive understanding of taste and design. She knew the color palette that made a room feel inviting, the type of light that flattered faces, and the social grace that made guests feel instantly at ease. Their meeting was not fate-based on social standing, but an intellectual and emotional combustion. They recognized a missing element in each other. George brought the logistics, the efficiency, and the ambitious engine. Louise brought the artistry, the empathy, and the soul. On June 14, 1877, they married. Their pact was not merely marital. It was foundational. They would build an empire together as equals. By 1881, pooling their savings, they acquired the Bellevue Hotel in Philadelphia. It was here that they first unleashed their combined genius. George handled the flawless operations, hiring excellent chefs and ensuring staff efficiency. Louise handled the atmosphere, transforming the public space into an oasis. She introduced those revolutionary Louise touches: fresh flowers on every table, the use of soft candlelight instead of harsh gaslight, and, critically, placing more space between tables to ensure privacy and intimacy. Louise understood that wealthy women needed beautiful, dignified public venues where they could gather, host, and be socially visible outside the confines of their private homes. The Bellevue became that essential destination. The feeling she created that the space was designed for them drew Philadelphia's elite like a magnet. Their reputation grew so quickly that the story goes they even shipped Philadelphia terrapin to Queen Victoria. They had mastered the art of hospitality, achieving a synergy that no single person could replicate. Their success was a testament not to George's ambition alone, but to the partnership in the storm that sustained them. They had turned shared vision into unprecedented reality, but the ambition of such a partnership could not be contained by Philadelphia. The whisper of their success reached the ears of New York's ultimate aristocracy, and the greatest invitation in the American hotel industry was about to arrive. The whispers of the Boldt's success traveled fast, echoing from Philadelphia up the eastern seaboard. The time had come for George to claim his crown in the city he had once entered as a frightened boy. In 1891, William Waldorf-Astoria, heir to one of America's richest families, was planning a hotel that would dwarf all others. A pal ace on Fifth Avenue. He needed the right general to command it. He offered the position to George. This was the ultimate prize, yet it came wrapped in immense risk. George had to navigate the infamous Astor four-mile feud. William Waldorf and his cousin, John Jacob Astor IV, were planning rival hotels right next door to each other, both using the same architect. Society drama was about to meet architectural design on the New York skyline. George, ever the risk-taker, said yes, knowing he would need to raise $100,000 just to furnish the place. He was not intimidated. He knew that with Louise's unparalleled taste, he could transform the monumental structure into an intimate, private palace. The Waldorf opened in 1893 amid a severe national economic crisis. The stress nearly broke Georg, but his gamble paid off. In hard times, the very rich often spend lavishly to demonstrate that their world remains untouched. The Waldorf became their sanctuary. Then, John Jacob Astor IV opened at the Astoria next door. George performed a masterstroke of diplomacy and logistics. He convinced the warring cousins to merge operations, connecting the two rival buildings with a magnificent corridor. The Waldorf-Astoria was born, the largest, most influential hotel in the world, a behemoth of over 1,600 rooms, instantly becoming the address for presidents, tycoons, and society. Weddings. Here, in the engine room of American high society, Louise's silent influence was at its most powerful, though often quiet. She insisted on the daily fresh flowers and the soft lighting that became the hotel's trademark elements that elevated the atmosphere from mere luxury to genuine welcome. But her most profound contribution was a silent, social revolution. In an era when Victorian etiquette demanded segregation, the Waldorf still maintained separate ladies' entrances. Louise saw this as demeaning, an implication of inferiority. She insisted they be removed, allowing women to walk directly through the main doors, recognized as equal guests alongside the men. This small architectural change sent a massive message of respect across the social landscape, confirming The hotel's status as a forward-thinking, modern institution. George Boldt was lauded as the man who defined the modern American hotel. He was among the highest-paid executives in the country, his fortune estimated in the tens of millions, the equivalent of hundreds of millions today. They lived in lavish suites, sending their children to the best schools. They had successful climbed from the crowded kitchens to the undisputed top of American society. Yet, life in the glass palace extracted a terrible cost. Running the world's most important hotel meant always on, always anticipating, always fixing, always hosting, always judging. The unrelenting demand for perfection was mentally and emotionally exhausting. The sheer pressure of the public gaze and constant, ceaseless work meant their private life was almost non-existent. George, standing at the summit of the American dream, remembered the quiet islands and the old castles of his rugged youth. Louise, after decades of pouring her soul into designing perfect spaces for other people, desperately craved a place that was purely theirs, shielded from the relentless demands of the world they had conquered. They longed for a sanctuary where they could finally be George and Louise, free from the relentless identity of Mr. and Mrs. Waldorf-Astoria. Their search led them north, far from the skyscrapers and the societal demands, to the Thousand Islands, a stunning archipelago of over 1,800 islands strung across the St. Lawrence River. Unlike the performative social life of other wealthy enclaves, this region offered genuine, rugged privacy. Families sailed, fished, and read without an audience. This was not a place to show off. It was a place to breathe. In the summer of 1895, they found what they were looking for, a small 5-acre island near Alexandria Bay. It was called Hart Island. The land itself had just changed hands, but within days, Louise bought it herself. The moment the papers were signed, George made his intention undeniable. altering the spelling to Hart Island. But he went further, commissioning engineers to reshape the shoreline so when viewed from above, the entire island formed the distinct shape of a Valentine heart. This act, done by a man known for his rigid logistics and budgets, was a breathtaking piece of symbolic poetry in granite and earth. It was more than a summer address. It was a physical, topographical declaration. They were ready to build something that was about love, not about commerce. The vision had been found. The ultimate work was about to begin. With Hart Island secured and reshaped, the final phase of George and Louise's great collaboration began. By 1899, the existing cottage felt too small for the magnitude of their shared dream. George did not want merely more rooms. He wanted a testament. He wanted a structure that echoed the romantic, sky-touching keeps he remembered from his humble childhood on the Baltic Sea. He decided to build a true castle, not just a mansion called a castle, but a massive stone fortress inspired by the Rhineland towers of Prussia. George hired the distinguished Philadelphia firm G.W. and W.D. Hewitt. The instruction was clear: matching the scale of his love, design the grandest private castle in America. The budget was set at $2.5 million, a staggering sum then. Well over 80 minus $1 in today's value. George could easily afford it. But the driving force was not his wealth. It was his heart. Louise, the artistic soul of the partnership, was meticulously involved in every single blueprint. The goal was not a showpiece for strangers, but a functional family home built with beauty and strength. She dictated the flow of light, the layout of the rooms for maximum comfort, and ensured that the gardens complemented the local landscape rather than fighting it. The final plan called for a colossal 6-story main building, multiple towers of varying heights to break the roofline, and 120 rooms spread across a massive footprint. The material chosen was rose-colored granite, quarried from nearby Oak Island, a tough stone, beautiful in the sunlight and resilient against the harsh St. Lawrence winters. 4 years, 300 highly skilled workers, masons, carpenters, and artisans toiled on the island. A temporary city of barracks and workshops sprang up overnight. It was a logistical marvel, managed with the same relentless efficiency had perfected at the Waldorf-Astoria. But it was in the intimate details that George's true purpose was revealed. Throughout the castle's design, small, silent heart shapes were placed everywhere. They were carved into the stone railings, embedded in the tile patterns, and subtly hidden in the woodwork. They weren't loud or childish. They were quiet, deliberate affirmations. This was George's secret language, a monument built for Louis, where the central purpose of love was literally written into the stone itself. Inside, the plan balanced public and private life perfectly. The ground floor housed a grand hall and dining rooms for welcoming guests. The second floor was strictly for family, the master suite for George and Louise, and comfortable rooms for their children, Clover and George Jr. Even the basement was a marvel of modern efficiency, concealing kitchens, storage, and a network of tunnels that allowed staff to move unseen between the buildings and reach the powerhouse in any weather. Outside, Louise's vision came to life in the Italian gardens. She demanded formal lines, low hedges, and geometric beds, arranged around fountains that captured the sun. Yet, she insisted on quiet corners and hidden paths, places where one could simply read or talk without the formality of the grand rooms. A swan pond was placed for calm views from the main windows, adding movement and tranquility to the rigid stone landscape. The ambition reached far beyond the castle itself. George planned a complete estate, the massive yacht house on Wellesley Island, to house their flotilla, including the 104-foot houseboat La Duchesse, the powerhouse disguised as a medieval tower to provide every room with revolutionary electric light, and the playful Ulster Tower guest house, Designed for joy with a bowley, NG alley and billiard room, every detail screamed of boundless love and meticulous planning. But as the years of construction rolled on, a devastating shadow began to creep over their dream. By 191, Louise felt profoundly tired and short of breath. She was fighting a battle no money could win. By 1902, doctors delivered the truth. She suffered from heart disease, or possibly tuberculosis. The treatments were limited to rest and fresh air. The illness did not stop her spirit, but it began to dictate the schedule. Workers built temporary ramps so she could reach the upper floors. Without climbing, she reviewed tile samples, wallpapers, and fixtures from chairs placed near the windows, her voice growing quieter, her focus remaining intense. The castle was still hers in spirit, even as her body slowed. George, now fully aware of the ticking clock, pushed the work forward with a frantic, desperate urgency. He poured his immense resources into the effort, determined to reach his symbolic deadline, Valentine's Day, 1905. He needed to finish, to deliver the stone and steel promise before fate could intervene. By late 1903, the exterior was nearly complete, the gardens planted, the systems being tested. The final few months of 1904 were meant to be the last sprint. But time, the one thing George Boldt could never buy, ran out first. The race against time, fueled by boundless love and unlimited wealth, ended in absolute, devastating defeat. The meticulous planning, the frantic surge, to reach the Valentine's Day deadline, faltered just weeks into 1904. On the bitterly cold morning of January 7th, in the controlled quiet of Manhattan, Louise Augusta Carr Boldt died. He, our heart, which had been the true, vibrant engine of their personal and professional empire, simply failed. George, their son George Jr., and daughter Clover were there, witnessing the final, irreversible surrender. For George Boldt, the immigrant who had mastered every variable of the modern world, this was the one logistical and emotional failure he could not conquer. His immense fortune and power were rendered utterly meaningless before the finality of death. In the crushing, silent aftermath of that hour, George Boldt performed his last, most defining act as Louise's devoted husband. He reached for the telegraph wire and, with a heavy finality of soul, sent the command that immediately froze his greatest ambition: stop all construction on Heart's land. The chaotic, hopeful symphony of creation died instantly. 300 skilled men, working tirelessly through the winter preparation, set down their tools and stood in mute, profound reverence. The collective noise of a monumental project, driven by years of relentless effort, simply ceased. It wasn't just work that stopped. It was the future. Look at the magnitude of his surrender. The castle stood approximately 90% complete. The exterior was finished. The immense granite structure was sealed against the elements. Most of the 120 rooms were plastered, floored, and ready. All the final, intimate touches Louise had spent years selecting. The massive yacht house was functional. The powerhouse, prepared to flood the estate with revolutionary electric light, was ready to The gardens, planted precisely to Louise's designs, were simply waiting for the warmth of spring to burst into the life she would never see. Every practical, logical reason screamed at Reg to finish the final 10%. He possessed the resources, the crew, and the logistical genius to complete it within a few months. It would have been the sensible, the expected tribute to his wife's memory, but George Boldt was not making a logical choice. He was making an honest one. The answer to the agonizing question, why did he leave it unfinished, lies in the unique, sacred nature of the gift itself. The castle was never an investment or a mere monument to status. It was the ultimate physical manifestation of a promise, a dedication of a shared future. The house was meant for her. And the moment Louise was gone, the singular, essential purpose of the castle evaporated. For George, to finish the castle without Louise would have been the profoundest form of pretense, a spectacular, hollow lie built in the very stone dedicated to truth. He refused to desecrate the project's intention. He chose to leave it exactly as it was, a frozen, agonizing monument, tied to a love that was permanently interrupted. He consciously chose the pain of honesty over the comfort of completion, ensuring that the structure would forever reflect the exact moment his life broke. George never reversed the order. Though work in New York continued, he returned to manage the Waldorf and his other vast enterprises. His life was fundamentally cleaved in two. He continued to summer in the Thousand Islands, but he chose Wellesley Island across the water. From there, he could see his magnificent, abandoned dream every single day: the heart-shaped Isle and the silent towers, a constant, brutal physical reminder of his loss. He chose to live with the visible pain, refusing to set foot on the shore of Hart Island, acknowledging that the house thought Louise was merely stone, empty of its soul. He died in his Waldorf suite on December 5, 1916, never having fulfilled his greatest dream. He was buried beside Louise, leaving the castle, that massive stone heart, to his children, still and silent, a permanent testament to a man who possessed the world but chose to surrender it for love. When George Boldt died in 1916, the castle, the great, frozen symbol of his love, passed to his children, George Jr. and Clover. To them, the island was not a monument of devotion, but a poignant, overwhelming artifact of their mother's memory and their father's devastating grief. It was not their dream. It was a promise meant for a past generation. For 2 years, the estate stood silent, waiting for a purpose that never came. In 1918, the children made the practical decision their father had refused to make. They sold Hart Island. The buyer was Edward John Noble, the New York businessman who owned Beechnut and was instrumental in making Lifesavers candy famous. Noble saw not a frozen tragedy, but a potent mist. The newspapers had already amplified the heartbreaking love story, and tour boats were passing the island daily. Drawn by the haunting silhouette of the abandoned towers, Noble imagined a a resort, or perhaps a paid public attraction. But here, Noble made his tragic, pivotal mistake. He did not invest in finishing the property, nor did he invest in guarding it. Instead, he allowed visitors to come freely, often without admission fees or proper supervision, hoping to capitalize on its instant fame as a ruin. This choice, meant to seem generous, was, in truth, a sentence of slow destruction. A building designed for a single family, constructed on a private island with open windows and doors, suddenly faced the relentless cruelty of the public and the unchecked violence of nature. The castle began to suffer what we call the price of abandonment. Harsh St. Lawrence winters cracked the exposed stone and warped the fine woodwork. The missing locks and unsupervised access invited theft. People, telling themselves the structure was already lost, began to strip it piece by piece. Copper pipes, valuable wiring, carved wood, and ornamental metal, the very details Louise had painstakingly chosen, were systematically dismantled and sold. The intimacy of the dream was being sold for scrap. Image, audio focus, graffiti, and decay. The silent walls began to speak in a new, discordant voice. Graffiti crawled across the exposed plaster, names scratched into the stone, forming an accidental, crude timeline of neglect. A tower, once designed for joyous dancing and bowling, had its glass shattered. The final insult came in 1939, when fireworks set the powerhouse roof ablaze, leaving a scar of black smoke and burnt stone. Later, during World War II, the island was stripped of iron and structural steel, further weakening its frame. Louise's elegant Italian gardens turned wild. The Swan Pond became stagnant. By the 1950s and 60s, the castle had fully transformed into a romantic ruin straight out of a storybook. It was beautiful from a distance, the granite towers commanding the sky, but up close, it was visibly broken, with vines growing out of empty windows and trees taking root where furniture should have been. The castle became a symbol, not just of interrupted love, but of the speed and severity with which neglect can erase beauty. Engineers looked at it and saw a disaster. Historians saw a memory rapidly fading, the question looming over the decaying stone was simple: would the Boldt castle be saved, or would George's monument to love simply collapse into the river? Consumed by the consequence of his absolute grief, the long quiet eventually drew to a crisis point. When Edward John Noble died in 1958, Hart Island and the decaying castle were inherited by the E.J. Noble Foundation. For 2 more decades, the foundation watched as the price of abandonment intensified. The elements and vandals were relentless, the risk of total structural collapse, or the necessity of selling the island for private development grew larger with every harsh winter. The castle, once a symbol of boundless love, was now an expensive, rapidly deteriorating liability. By the 1970s, the foundation knew they were facing a grim choice: demolition or a desperate search for a partner who could truly save the place. They looked for anyone who could rescue the castle in a way that honored its history and allowed public access. In 1977, the answer arrived in the form of the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority, TIBA. This was not a conservation group, but an entity focused on the regional economy. They believed deeply that a restored Boldt castle could bring jobs, pride, and life back to the local towns along the St. Lawrence River. The deal they struck was legendary and utterly unique. The E.J. Noble Foundation agreed to transfer Hart Island and the castle to the TIBA for the symbolic price of $1. But this dollar came with a rigid, non-negotiable promise: every single dollar of visitor revenue from ticket sales, tour, and souvenirs must be spent exclusively on the castle's restoration and perpetual upkeep. And no government funds, no tax dollars, no corporate handouts. The castle had to pay for its own resurrection. This was an extraordinary gamble. TIBA stepped forward into a rough reality. 73 years of weather, decay, and vandalism had inflicted deep, costly harm. Rough estimates suggested that $15 million would be needed just to stabilize the structure and prevent total loss. They signed the papers anyway. The era of George Boldt's private grief was over. The story of Hart Island was officially passed from a personal tragedy to a collective, public promise. The community, driven by the haunting beauty of the ruin and the powerful history it contained, was now responsible for saving the frozen heart of the St. Lawrence. The work had to begin immediately. The Thousand Islands Bridge Authority did not waste a moment. Over the brutally cold winter of 1977 and 1978, crews raced against the elements to stabilize the structure. They braced weak walls, patched urgent leaks in the massive roof, fenced off dangerous areas, and set temporary supports. The castle was unsafe, but it was no longer dying. In the spring of 1978, Hart Island reopened to the public, but it was not presented as a polished attraction. TIBA made the bold, truthful decision to open the site as a work in progress. Visitors walked through the damage and saw the repairs happening simultaneously: scaffolding against carved stone, piles of materials next to crumbling plaster, and workers in hard hats diligently performing painstaking labor. The public responded with an overwhelming surge of curiosity and support. That first season, nearly 100,000 visitors came, far exceeding expectations. Their admission fees flowed directly into new roofs, stronger structures, and basic security. A virtuous cycle was born. The more people came, the more work could be done. The more progress people saw, the more invested they became in the story. The restoration team adopted a brilliant philosophical approach to preservation, rejecting the idea of total sanitized perfection. They recognized that the most powerful part of the castle's story was its incompleteness. Their plan was precise. Some rooms would be meticulously finished exactly as George and Louise intended, using original drawings and materials. But other rooms, particularly on the upper floors, would be left intentionally unfinished, bare walls, exposed brick, and even some of the older graffiti left intact. This choice was essential for historical integrity. It was a refusal to lie about the interruption, walking through the finished grand hall and then ascending to the raw, empty rooms above became a vital part of the visitor experience. It showed, without a single road, the exact moment the command stop all construction was given, and what the long decades of abandonment truly looked like. The castle was now not just a ruin, it was a living classroom and a monument to honesty. It taught that love built the castle, but loss defined it, and community saved it. With stabilization achieved, the Tiber team embarked on the long, patient work of recreation. This wasn't just construction, it was craft. As an act of respect, workers and historians meticulously studied old blueprints and fragments. When materials had rotted beyond repair, THA copied them exactly, using the same type of granite and traditional joinery methods. Broken windows were replaced with glass made to look slightly imperfect, mirroring the original panes of 1900. The focus shifted to the unique supporting structures that embodied the Boldt's modern vision. First, the powerhouse. Once gutted by the 1939 fire, its medieval-looking stone shell was CED, and the interior was rebuilt. It was transformed into a museum showcasing George's advanced thinking, how he planned for electric lights and central heating when they were till marvels of engineering. The rebuilt powerhouse symbolized renewal, devastated by fire, yet still standing, still capable of providing light. Across the water, the yacht house on Wellesley Island, a vast structure designed to hold George's flotilla, including the La Duchesse, was repaired beam by beam. The rot was stripped away, and the vast wooden structure was restored, becoming a museum celebrating the region's rich boating heritage, echoing George's joy for the water. Finally, the landscape artists turned their attention to Louise's Italian gardens. Time had erased most of the formal design, leaving behind only broken statues and cracked stone pools. Using old photographs as their guides, crews rebuilt the fountain pools, laid curving paths, and planted hedges. They selected specific species tulips, roses, and lilacs to bloom in elegant, careful waves throughout the season, honoring Louise's taste for order, light, and grace. It was not a perfect copy, but the spirit of Louise's design returned. The message of Heart Island began to shine clearly with each restored piece. The restorers were not simply fixing a building, they were restoring a love story. Every repaired stone, every replanted flower, serves as a poignant reminder of the care George and Louise poured into their ultimate home. Today, when visitors walk those paths, they are walking through the restored vision of Louise Boldt herself. By the late 1980s, the gamble paid off. Boldt Castle was drawing crowds from around the world. The restoration was working not only structurally, but emotionally. What had been a decaying ruin now stood as a living, breathing monument. Tourists were not merely viewing history. They were participating in an ongoing act of preservation. By the early 2000s, nearly $30 million had been reinvested into Heart Island, all funded exclusively by visitors' pockets, honoring the initial dollar deal promise. No tax dollars, no corporate sponsor, just people moved by the powerful story of George and Louise. The castle today stands as a triumphant example of what community dedication can achieve. But its modern success carries a profound irony. Heart Island has become one of the most romantic wedding destinations in North America. Every summer, Hundreds of couples choose to exchange vows here in Louise's meticulously restored gardens, all within the joyful, circular walls of the Ulster Tower, the place born from the devastating heartbreak of an interrupted love story, witnesses the celebration of new promises almost daily. See, Ouples choose Boldt Castle because they want a timeless setting of visible proof that love, even when facing loss or interruption, can endure forever in memory. The ultimate tragedy was transformed into the ultimate hope. But the most striking thing about Boldt Castle is not its beauty or its triumph. It is the fact that it remains intentionally incomplete. This was the final, most insightful decision of the restoration team. While the first floor and supporting structures were returned to their intended glory, the upper stories remain much as they were found: bare brick, exposed beams, and raw plaster. Curators believe, rightly so, that leaving part of the castle unfinished tells the story better than any restoration ever could. If the entire structure had been meticulously finished and furnished, it would simply be another grand estate, static and perfect. But the halted construction, the silent staircases, the empty rooms, they possess a profound emotional honesty. They remind every visitor of something deeper, that life can pivot without warning, that even the wealthiest hearts can break, and that all human effort is subject to fate. The raw Washington LLs become a mirror, allowing us to stand in the same silence that filled George Boldt's life after Louise died. The names scratched into the plaster by vandals decades ago were left there not to celebrate the destruction, but to show what happens when we stop caring, and why the new caretakers must never forget their vow. The castle's unfinished walls say what words cannot. Love is powerful, but it doesn't always guarantee a happy ending. Yet, even unfinished love can leave behind an indelible beauty. This place is a classroom without walls. It teaches young visitors that ambition can lift an immigrant from a basement kitchen to the pinnacle of hospitality, but that fortune offers no shield from human sorrow. It teaches historians that success is complex, and that true stewardship means choosing honesty over polished presentation. The legacy of George and Louise Boldt does not crumble. It repeats every time a hotel manager remembers to dim a light for warmth, every time a designer chooses flowers because a space deserves life, and every time a community chooses collaboration over despair. As the departing boats pull away from Hart Island, the castle appears smaller, but its meaning feels infinitely larger. It is no longer a pile of granite and towers. It is a profound narrative about work, devotion, grief, and care. It is the proof that a tea meant for one person can become a gift for many, without losing its heart. What does Boldt Castle ultimately ask of us? It asks us to be brave enough to love deeply, to build good things while we can, and to care for what we inherit, even if we were not the ones who created it. It asks us to tell the truth when a story is painful, and to keep telling it until it helps us someone else find hope. The lesson stays with every visitor. Start what matters, share what you can, and be honest about what you cannot finish.